Welcome to the Rugby Obsession Deep Dive. Right off the bat, I have to ask you to subscribe to the Rugby Obsession channel and newsletter. You really do not want to miss what we are covering today.
Yeah, you definitely want to hit that subscribe button for this one.
Because today we are looking at a completely massive piece of news from Planet Rugby. So imagine trying to fly and basically feed a self-sustaining army of 80 elite athletes across the Indian Ocean.
Right. It is honestly hard to wrap your head around.
It really is. I mean, we are talking chartered flights and taking over entire hotel floors. And that is exactly what Dave Rennie and the All Blacks are doing for this upcoming Rugby's greatest rivalry tour of South Africa. So he is taking roughly 80 players.
Which is just a staggering number. And our mission today is really to get underneath that figure. We want to understand the logistics of moving that many people and the strategic why behind this historic deployment.
Right.
Because this specific tour really acts as a massive reset button for the future of the All Blacks.
It totally does. And we seriously have to pause and visualize the mechanics here. Because taking 80 players is not a normal rugby tour. Like, to put this in perspective for you, think about the British and Irish Lions.
Oh yeah, their tours are legendary for being massive.
Exactly. They are famous for these sprawling and incredibly expensive traveling squads, but they max out at around 59 players.
Yeah, so 80 just completely dwarfs that.
It does. The sheer financial reality of just feeding that many elite forwards alone is mind-boggling, you know? Not to mention the logistics of getting them all from point A to point B.
Well, what's fascinating here is the sheer logistical necessity of that number when you actually look at the itinerary. I mean, the New Zealand Rugby Union isn't just sending a team. They're basically sending an entire rugby franchise to fulfill this jam-packed schedule.
Right, because it's not just a couple of games.
Exactly. You have the main event, which is a 4-test series against the Springboks. So that is 2 brutal physical matches in Johannesburg and then 1 in Cape Town.
And then that massive geographical pivot for the finale in Baltimore over in the USA.
Right, which is a gauntlet on its own for any Tier 1 nation. But layered on top of those 4 tests, you have midweek clashes against the heavyweights of South African club rugby.
The midweek games are just insane to me.
They really are.
Yeah.
They are playing the Stormers on August 7th, and then the Sharks on August 11th, followed by the Bulls on August 15th, and finally the Lions on August 25th.
Wow.
You simply cannot physically ask a normal core group of like 30 or 40 guys to survive that kind of attrition.
But practically speaking, like, how does a coaching staff even manage that? I am picturing the training paddock, and it just sounds like a recipe for absolute chaos.
Well, yeah, it would be under normal circumstances.
Right, because if you have a squad prepping for the Stormers on a Wednesday and a completely different squad prepping for the Springboks on a Saturday, how do you keep the messaging clear? You can't just run them all through the same drills.
You can't, which is why it requires an entirely different operational blueprint. According to the NZRU spokesperson in the report, they are expanding the coaching staff significantly to handle this.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, think of it less like a traditional rugby tour and more like an NFL-style training camp. You don't just have an attack coach and a defense coach anymore. You have a completely autonomous midweek coaching staff and then a parallel test coaching staff.
Wait, so they are effectively running 2 completely separate playbooks under one roof.
Precisely. The test squad never has to burn an ounce of mental energy analyzing the Stormers or the Sharks.
Yeah.
They're completely isolated and focused on the Springboks.
While the midweek squad operates in its own tactical bubble.
Yes. It's a massive, highly synchronized operation designed to prevent exactly the kind of chaos you mentioned.
Managing 2 entirely separate squads at the bottom of the world just sounds like an absolute logistical nightmare. And honestly, we want to know what you think about bringing 80 players on a tour. Drop your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the Rugby Obsession channel and newsletter.
Yeah, it is definitely a polarizing strategy, but it makes a lot of sense when you look at the man trying to pull it off.
Right, let's talk about Dave Rennie. For you fans who follow the coaching carousel closely, we all know Rennie stepped into a massive pressure cooker in March.
Yeah, especially taking over after Robertson's difficult tenure ended in 2025.
It's a tough spot to be in. He's 62, an ex-Wallabies and Chiefs coach. So, okay, let's unpack this. Rennie isn't just tinkering with a stable roster here.
Not at all.
By taking 80 players on the road, he is essentially holding open auditions on the world's most hostile rugby stage, isn't he?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Rennie is actually taking a page straight out of the blueprint written by his greatest rival.
Oh, you mean Springboks coach Rassie Erasmus?
Exactly. Erasmus proved that casting a massive, wide net is a highly positive and proactive method for evaluating talent under pressure. Look at the numbers.
Right. The source mentioned he successfully managed 49 players last year.
Yes, and he blooded 50 in 2024. So instead of testing fringe players in these isolated low-stakes environments at home, you just throw them directly into the deep end in South Africa.
So Rennie is essentially looking at Erasmus and saying, I see you're 50 and I will raise you to 80.
Exactly. You find out immediately who has the mental and physical fortitude for the All Blacks jersey. It just removes all the guesswork.
And the timeline really forces his hand, too, because before they even get to South Africa, the All Blacks have this intense pre-tour warm-up schedule.
Oh, yeah, it is a packed summer.
Right. They host France on July 4th, and then Italy on July 11th, and Ireland on July 18th. So you look at this incredibly dense season, and you realize this is all about accelerating the rebuild.
Absolutely. Because he has a looming deadline, which is the 2027 Rugby World Cup in Australia.
Right. There's zero time for a slow, comfortable multi-year transition.
Exactly. By bringing 80 guys, he is using this South African tour to compress 3 years of normal player development into a single, intense 4-week window.
Which brings us to the sharp end of the tour. Because this massive 80-man experiment has an expiration date.
Yes, it does. After that South African leg, the squad faces that massive logistical and geographical pivot we talked about earlier.
Right, moving from the tip of Africa to the east coast of the U.S.
Yeah, they head to Baltimore for that 4th test against the Springboks. And for that specific leg, the 80-man squad is expected to be drastically trimmed down to 65 or fewer.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. I want to push back on this a bit. Rugby isn't just about individual talent, it is about instinctive combinations and locker room culture.
That's very true.
So if you have this unified group of 80 guys who have just survived 4 brutal weeks in South Africa together, doesn't suddenly handing 15 or more players a plane ticket home right before a marquee test match in the U.S. completely kill the mood?
It sounds like it would.
Right. Doesn't that fracture the squad right when you need chemistry the most?
Yeah.
Or is it just a necessary evil?
This raises an important question about the psychological design of a tour like this. It sounds disruptive, but the disruption is actually a feature, not a bug.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, think of the 80-man phase in South Africa like a high-stakes startup incubator. You throw a ton of raw ideas, or in this case players, into a pressure cooker, fully knowing that not all of them will survive.
I see. So the cut down to 65 for the USA phase is when you actually solidify the core group.
Exactly. The 80-man phase is for discovery, but the 65-man phase is about backing the absolute best guys to take forward. By the time they land in Baltimore, Rennie will know exactly who his absolute best players are.
So the ambiguity is just gone.
Yep. The 65 players who survive that cut will know they earned their spot through the toughest physical and mental evaluation in modern rugby.
Wow.
It builds a very specific kind of resilience, a chemistry based on having survived the ultimate test together. It sharpens their focus rather than distracting them.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. It totally changes how we think about team building. It's not just about a coach sitting in a room picking the right players on a whiteboard. It's about engineering an environment that literally forces the right players to reveal themselves under pressure.
Absolutely.
Well, before we wrap up today's exploration of this historic tour, a quick reminder to please subscribe to the Rugby Obsession channel and newsletter. You definitely don't want to miss our future deep dives.
And just to leave you with a final thought to ponder. If Dave Rennie's massive 80-man tour proves successful in accelerating the All Blacks rebuild for that 2027 World Cup, will this supersized touring model become the new mandatory gold standard for all Tier 1 nations?
Oh, wow, that is a huge question.
Right. And if it does, how will that forever change the logistics, the immense financial requirements, and the sheer scale of international rugby going forward?
Thank you for listening to the Rugby Obsession Deep Dive, and we'll look forward to you listening to our next episode.